शहनशाह कायनात इमाम ज़माना बआवाज़ बुलंद सलवात
अल्लाहुम्मा सल्लि अला मुहम्मद व आले मुहम्मद।
बिस्मिल्लाहिर रहमानिर रहीम। अल्हम्दुलिल्लाहि रब्बिल आलमीन वस्सलातु वस्सलामु अला अशरफिल अंबिया'i वल मुरसलीन हबीबि इलाहिल आलमीन अबिल क़ासिमिल मुस्तफ़ा मुहम्मद।
अल्लाहुम्मा सल्लि अला मुहम्मद व आले मुहम्मद
व अला अहलि बैतिहि अत-तय्यबीन अत-ताहिरीन अल-मअसूमीन अल-मुंतजबीन। क़ाल अल्लाहु फ़ी किताबिहिल हकीम बिस्मिल्लाहिर रहमानिर रहीम। अल्लाहु अल्लज़ी ख़लक़कुम मिन ضعफ़िन थुम्मा जअल मिन बअदि ضعफ़िन क़ुव्वह थुम्मा जअल मिन बअदि क़ुव्वतिन ضعफ़न व शैबह यख़्लुक़ु मा यशाअ व हुवल अलीमुल क़दीर। सदक़ल्लाहुल अलियुल अज़ीम। व सल्लु अला मुहम्मद व आलि मुहम्मद।
अल्लाहुम्मा सल्लि अला मुहम्मद व आले मुहम्मद।
Esteemed scholars, friends, community members, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The Quran, in a number of verses, describes the life cycle and growth of the human being physically, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually. One of those verses is found in chapter number 30, Surah Ar-Rum. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Allahu alladhi khalaqakum min ضعف. It is God that created you from a state of weakness. You emerged, O human being, O mankind, from a state of weakness. ثم جعل من بعد ضعف قوة. And after emerging from a state of weakness, you ascended into a state of strength. ثم جعل من بعد قوة ضعفا وشيبة. And after strength, you descended into a state of weakness and old age. يَخْلُقُ مَا يَشَاءُ. It is God that creates as He wills. وَهُوَ الْعَلِيمُ الْقَدِيرُ. He is all-knowing, all-powerful. So, the physical manifestation of this verse is obvious. As babies are born, they are born in a state of need, perpetual need. They are born in a state of physical weakness. They are in need of their parents and their elders to assist them in every aspect of their living. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ascends us into a state of strength, into a state of adolescence and youthfulness and physical maturity. However, that does not last forever. As we read in Surah Yasin, وَمَنْ نُعَمِّرْهُ نُنَكِّسْهُ فِي الْخَلْقِ. That those who we give long life, eventually they become in a state of physical weakness. نُنَكِّسْهُ فِي الْخَلْقِ. That physical strength really does not last forever, and so you descend into a state of weakness again. In another verse, in chapter 46 of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, وَوَصَّيْنَا الْإِنسَانَ بِوَالِدَيْهِ إِحْسَانًا. That we prescribed and we commanded to the human being, to mankind, to display benevolence and righteousness towards his parents. حَمَلَتْهُ أُمُّهُ كُرْهًا وَوَضَعَتْهُ كُرْهًا. For it is because his mother carried him and gave birth to him and nursed him and sheltered him and protected him, all in toil and all in a state of hardship. And then at the tail end of the verse, it describes the state of maturity, of thought process. Not physical maturity, but of thought process. حَتَّى إِذَا بَلَغَ أَشُدَّهُ وَبَلَغَ 40 سَنَةً. Until he has reached the height of his maturity at the age of 40. And of course the age of 40 is just an example here. It is said that most of the prophets who became ordained as prophets became so at the age of 40. It is considered the height of intellectual and emotional maturity. In fact, narrations tell us that if a person reaches, one particular narration, it is interesting, it says that if a person reaches the age of 40 and has not placed his affairs in order. Basically, he hasn't, or she hasn't got his life together. They're still in a state of chaos. They're still in a state of disarray. They are aimless. Many people reach those ages and they're very aimless. Their life is still meaningless. They still have not figured out a goal or a purpose. And of course, discovering your purpose, there's no set date to it. It is a lifelong journey. We are continuously discovering our purpose. But if you reach an age where you have no set goals, then a particular narration says that the shaitan comes to this person, Iblis, the chief of troublemakers, and wipes the person on the head and says, "Ahlan biwajhin la yuflih abada," that welcome, welcome to a face that will never see success after this. Because if you get to a certain stage and if you have not figured out what your goals are for life, and not just your goals, what values you stand for, what principles that your values are rooted in, then really the chances of you figuring it out after that and setting goals are sometimes slim and none. This is not to say that you cannot reinvent yourself at any age, but reinventing yourself means that you actually have to have goals that you're shooting for, not wandering aimlessly like a lost person in the desert looking for the oasis. So when the person, according to this verse, reaches that age of intellectual maturity, finally he is able to look back and he makes the following statement: حتى إذا بلغ أشده وبلغ 40 سنة قال رب أوزعني أن أشكر نعمتك التي أنعمت علي وعلى والدي. O Allah, allow me to be in a state of grace, in a state of gratefulness and thankfulness for the blessings that you have conferred upon me and upon my parents. My parents, who were the source of my blessing, the ones that took care of me. My mother who stayed up nights without asking for anything from me. When I was sick, when I was lonely, when I was afraid, when I had no one to turn to, my mother was there. My father was there. Oh Allah, in the same way that they have blessed me, I want you to bless them. So what this verse is telling us is that one aspect of maturity is being able to look upon the source of our earthly blessings, which are our parents, and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reciprocate those blessings upon our parents. This is from the Quranic perspective, and of course there are many verses which describe the growth and life cycle of the human being from birth to adolescence to adulthood and to old age and back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Psychologists look at this from a different point of view. And there are many, many theories out there. Tonight I'd like to share a couple of them with you. And one of them in particular is the viewpoint or the theory which was developed by Dr. Eric Berne, who in the 1960s wrote a book called Games People Play, and he, of course, published a number of papers. He was a California-based researcher in the field of psychology. And in one of his theories, in a similar way to how Sigmund Freud described the three components of the human psyche, which is the id, the ego, and the superego, Dr. Eric Berne describes it in a similar way. He says, there are three ego states in which the human being operates from. Those three ego states are referred to as the parent's ego, the child ego, and the adult ego. So what are they? In a nutshell, basically. He says that the parent ego refers to the following. It refers to a massive collection of recordings in the brain of external events that are perceived in the first 5 years of life. So the first five years of life, everything that the child is able to perceive through sensory perception. And of course, you know, the reality is that sensory perception begins even before that time. Sensory perception actually begins in the womb. And there are many scientific experiments that have conducted that prove that a child can begin to hear certain things while they're in the womb of the mother, and they begin to recognize certain sounds based off of what they have heard in the womb. It's very, very spectacular. You know, the narrations that describe the miraculous life and birth of Sayyidati Nisa al-Alameen, Lady Fatima, may peace and blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be upon her. They say that even before she was born, she was a source of mercy and consolation for her family members. That when she was in the womb of her blessed mother, Lady Khadija, peace be upon her, that she would speak to her and give her words of consolation. A narration from our Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He says that I would enter upon Khadija and I would find her speaking. She would be addressing someone. And I don't know who she was addressing because at that time she was alone. All of the women of Quraysh, of the tribe of Mecca, they had abandoned her. Why? Because of the choice that she made to marry Rasulullah, who in their eyes was not looked upon in a very positive way. Why? Because in their eyes the standard was a person who had position, who had influence, who had money, who had a family to back them up, who had a tribe to back them up. And the Prophet was poor. He did not come from wealth. He was an orphan, one who had lost his parents. And so when they saw Khadija, a woman who was wealthy, asking for the hand of the Prophet in marriage, to them they were baffled. And so they told her that if you do this, then you are going to risk your association. You are going to risk your status. And Lady Khadija was not a woman who cared for association and status and all of the physical adornments of this life and all of the trinkets that come with that. So she was willing, through her marriage to the Prophet, to risk all of the social status that came with that. And so she was alone. And so the Prophet, when he saw her addressing and speaking, he said to her, who are you speaking to? Who are you addressing? Who are you responding to? And Khadija replies to him, it is the janeen, it is the infant which is in my womb, which is speaking to me, which is giving me words of consolation, which is keeping me with company when all of the women of Quraysh decided to abandon me. So even before that age, there is sensory perception. So the adult ego, going back to that ego state, the adult ego refers to a collection, a large collection of the memory of the recordings that happen during those first 5 years of sensory perception. So brothers and sisters, the things that we say to our children or what they see during those first 5 years are very important. And this is where the Quran points to in Surah An-Nur. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, O you who believe, لِيَسْتَأْذِنُكُمُ الَّذِينَ مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ وَالَّذِينَ لَمْ يَبْلُغُوا الْحُلُمَ مِنْكُمْ ثَلَاثَ مَرَّاتٍ. Those who are in your home, that are beneath the age of puberty, meaning children, let them, if they want to visit you in your private chambers, meaning in your room, this is an address to the parents, in your private chambers, let them ask for permission during 3 times. Number 1, مِنْ قَبْلِ صَلَاةِ الْفَجْرِ. One is before Salatul Fajr, during the time when most people are asleep. Number 2, وَحِينَ تَضَعُونَ ثِيَابَكُمْ وَحِينَ تَضَعُونَ ثِيَابَكُمْ مِنَ الظَّهِيرَةِ. When you come back home during the noontime, and you remove the outer layers of your clothing, this is the second time. And the third, وَمِن بَعْدِ صَلَاةِ الْعِشَاءِ, after the Isha prayers, which are also considered a time of privacy between the spouses, between the husband and wife. Why? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ثَلَاثُ عَوْرَاتٍ لَكُمْ. These 3 times are awra. And awra is something which is private. In Arabic, the private parts of the body, of the, in anatomy, the private parts are referred to as awra. But in reality, any private space is referred to as an awra. Why? So as the children do not see what they should not see, they do not hear what they cannot hear. It is at that time that the that the parent ego picks up certain phrases, such as what? Don't talk to strangers. Look both ways before crossing the street. Chew with your mouth closed. It's an entire storage that happens. And it's very fascinating because the brain is truly like a computer that you can store commands in. Many psychologists have written about this. And so one psychologist in particular, he was saying that if you understand that the brain, it's like whatever you say to the brain, it's like a keyboard, you are typing in commands. So every time the child, for instance, experiences rejection in those early days, they carry on that rejection into their adult life. And this is why many people, they are afraid of rejection, even as adults. It's something that they picked up on as children. In one book, one psychologist, one author, he says that the average child, by the time they reach the age of 18, they have heard the word no 150,000 times. Their parents tell them, no, don't do this, don't do that. And sometimes it's not explicitly the word or the phrase no. Sometimes it comes in the form of a rejection. A child is waiting for their parent to come home to take them out to the park or to an event, and that doesn't happen because they're busy or because they're preoccupied with other things which are less important than the family. That itself is a no, it's a form of rejection, and they carry this on into adulthood. So this is one ego state. It is referred to as the parent ego state. The second is the child ego state. And the child ego state is a recording not of the external events, but rather of the internal emotions that happen. So all of the experiences that happen during childhood, there is a feeling, there is an emotion which is attached to it. A child, for instance, sees a clown and either feels happy or they feel very scared. Sometimes children are afraid of clowns. There's a phobia. In the list of phobias, there's a phobia which is assigned to people who are afraid of clowns. Or something happens and you feel funny, you feel happy on the inside. This is also part of the child ego state. And the third is referred to as the adult ego state. And what the adult ego state is that it is an ego state which allows for evaluation and validation of all of those feelings. Meaning that you get to a point during your adult ego state that you begin to question all of the events, things that you picked up from your parents, from the adult ego. Why did my parents tell me don't be afraid, be afraid of talking to strangers? Where did that come from? Is that a legitimate fear to have, or it's not a legitimate fear to have? Many times, if you study child psychology, unfortunately, many of the irrational fears, the phobias that we have, we pick them up because our parents were afraid of something which was irrational. You know, they're afraid of dogs, for instance. So you're told, stay away from dogs completely, at least a distance of 10 meters at all times. Or they're afraid from talking to strangers because maybe they were foreigners that came to a land and they did not know how to converse and engage with people. These fears, many of them are phobias, they're irrational. Or the fear of rejection, or the fear of public speaking. They are passed down from one generation to another. What psychologists say that the adult ego state allows you to do is to evaluate these feelings, to evaluate these emotions. Should I keep these as a responsible adult? As a reasonable adult, as an intellectual adult, should I keep these fears or should I get rid of these fears? And that's why sometimes you see, brothers and sisters, people, they mature physically. However, they are still in that adult ego state, they're still in that parent ego state and that child ego state. I've noticed myself sometimes going to a doctor's office for a visit and noticing people who are well into their adult years, something as basic as getting an immunization or drawing blood, and they begin to act like a 7 or 8-year-old child from their fear. This is something that they never really grew out of. It's a fear that they, perhaps, I remember in some of our own circles that sometimes if our parents really wanted to scare us, they would tell you that, I'm going to take you to the doctor to get an immunization if you don't quiet down. Or if one child was going out with the parents and the other child wasn't supposed to tag along, they would tell them growing up that, we're taking him to go get a shot at immunization, right? So playing on some of the irrational fears. It is not until we grow out of the child ego and the parent ego and we grow into the adult ego that we actually begin to gain a proper understanding of our own psyche and what we should operate and believe out of. See, this is where the height of maturity comes from. When we talk about the human life cycle, this is where the height of maturity comes from. The Quran tells us, حَتَّى إِذَا بَلَغَ أَشُدَّهُ وَبَلَغَ 40 سَنَةً. When he has reached the age of maturity and reached the age of 40, because normally as you reach the age of 40, they say, and now it's not just the midlife crisis. I don't know if they talk about that here in Swedish society, the midlife crisis, where you reach the middle of your life, which is supposedly the age 40, and you look back at your life and you think, oh my God, did I accomplish the things that I wanted to accomplish? And so some people, they start acting like teenagers. The perceived picture is they'll go out and buy a sports car, or they'll begin to dress much younger because they feel younger. They don't want to have to face the reality that I've reached the middle of my life. And nowadays, in the United States at least, I know, we have not only the midlife crisis, but we have the quarter life crisis as well. So by age 25, youth who are now out of college and are now working for a company or working a job, they're asking themselves, is this what I'm going to do for the rest of my life? Just go to a job, make enough money to pay my bills, see my children and wife, and after hours and on the weekend, and that's it for the rest of my life, and there's no productivity after that? This is what is referred to as the quarter life crisis. Now, the reason I mentioned this, and I know this was a little bit of a long introduction, but the reason I want to talk about this is because when you live in the Western world, one of the highlights of living in I should say at least the perceived highlights of living in the Western world is the concept of freedom and enjoying freedom. So what does it truly mean to enjoy freedom? See, there are two things that I want to compare and contrast between. There is exercising freedom, and then there is being carefree and careless. And those are two completely different ideas. Sometimes we confuse having freedom with being carefree and careless. See, exercising freedom is the height of maturity. When you talk about being hur, when we describe Sayyid al-Shuhada Abi Abdullah al-Husayn alayhi salam, one of the honorary titles that he is given is Abu al-Ahrar, father of the free men. One of the admonishments that he gave to the enemy on the day of Ashura was Kunu ahraran fi dunyakum. Exercise freedom. Freedom is different than being carefree. See, he was a man of freedom. He was not a man that was carefree and careless. If he was a man that was carefree and careless, he could have thought to himself, to heck with everything that's happening. I'm going to sit in my home. I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to be comfortable. And whatever is going on in the world, let the world burn. I'm not responsible for any of this. And this is the challenge, brothers and sisters. One of the challenges that we have in today's world, especially in this world, and sometimes I'm very hesitant to speak about this because sometimes it's pushing the wrong buttons. But we live in a world, unfortunately, which glorifies the victim mentality. Everybody in this day and age is a victim. Now, here's the thing. There is a difference between being oppressed and being a victim. Two very different things. Imam Hussein alayhi salam, the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, the Prophet himself, Imam Ali, Fatima, Al-Hasan alayhi salam, all of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, they were all oppressed. There was no doubt about that. There were grave injustices that were committed against them. However, never at once in their life did they take on the victim mentality. The oppression that happened in the world was not their fault. However, they did see it as their responsibility. There's a difference, brothers and sisters, between fault and responsibility. If somebody showed up to your doorstep today, and they knocked on your door, and you opened the door, and you found a baby in a crib, and you don't know where this baby comes from. It's not your fault that the baby showed up on your doorstep. However, it is now your responsibility to take care of that baby, and you're responsible for its well-being. You cannot just shut the door. This is the difference between fault and responsibility. Most people, the mentality is, if it's not my fault, it's not my problem. If it's not your fault, it's not your fault. However, that doesn't mean that you are absolved from the responsibility. And this is the difference between exercising freedom, understanding it from a mature point of view, and being careless, which is understanding fault and responsibility from a careless point of view. So the Quran talks to us about growth and maturity. It's not only physical maturity. It is intellectual and emotional and spiritual maturity, where you understand that you are a responsible human being, and when you are given freedom, you must be responsible for that freedom. Because nowadays, brothers and sisters, it's very easy to say, what's going on in the world is not my fault. Let the politicians fight. Now, to a certain extent, I would agree. There are certain things that at the political level we cannot fix. And in reality, some of the political problems that we see are not political problems. They are spiritual problems. Has actually nothing to do with politics at all. And it's not to be fixed at the political level. It's to be fixed at the spiritual level. And there's a long discussion behind that. However, when you enjoy freedom, part of that maturity is that you take on responsibility. And this was the legacy of Lady Fatima Zahra, salawatullah wa salamu alayhi. So there are a couple of examples of that. You know, with freedom, the question that we have to ask ourselves is, what are we going to do with the freedom that we are endowed? Now, most people in today's world, what they do with their freedom of time and their freedom of expression and their freedom of access to social media and the news is that they will sit for countless hours scrolling through social media, watching other people live their lives, listening to this news outlet and that news outlet. And when you do that, you may not notice it, but subconsciously you are outsourcing your thought process to somebody else. You are telling that news outlet, or you are telling that social media platform that I have absolved myself of thinking, you do the thinking for me. Whatever opinions are out there, I'm going to take on those opinions, and I am going to make that, I'm going to completely absolve myself of intellectual responsibility. And this is the challenge that we have in this day and age. Or you can decide to be a responsible person and exercise your freedom of expression and freedom of thoughts and freedom of speech in a very powerful way. And you don't have to go very far for this. Right here in Sweden, really one of the most inspiring examples that we learned of within the past couple of years is the example of Greta Thunberg, the young climate activist, who when she began as a young lady, began only by herself. It was a solitary display. And sometimes you think you are alone. There's a difference between feeling lonely. There's a difference between being lonely, feeling lonely, and being alone. See, confident people are people who realize that even if they are alone, they are not lonely. There are people that are with them. Even if they are one person, physically, there are other people that are with them in spirit and emotion. And all it really takes is one person. And she was on her own, and now, a couple of years later, she has inspired more than 11 million people in what is considered the largest pro-environmental movement in modern day history. And this is a person who doesn't come from wealth. In fact, there are certain factors that you know of that in the eyes of modern society would actually work against you and hinder your progress. But she did not allow those things to define her, those limitations, those perceived limitations to define her. Because she has freedom of thoughts, freedom of expression. This is a person who's living in a first world country who could say, oh, it's not my fault. Let us blame the third world countries. Let us blame the countries that are most responsible for carbon emissions. It's not my fault. But she did not think that way. Fault is different than responsibility. Maybe it's not your fault, but it doesn't mean that it's not your responsibility. So this is what it means, brothers and sisters, to think about freedom and appreciate freedom from a mature point of view. And this is something that we should never ever take for granted. One of the criticisms of Lady Fatima Zahra salawatullah wa salamu alayhi, during Al-Khutbah Al-Fadakiyya, and I implore all of you to study Al-Khutbah Al-Fadakiyya. It is one of the final sermons of Lady Fatima that she spoke in the Masjid of the Prophet. Narration tells that she emerged from her home after the martyrdom of the Prophet with a number of women. She had veiled herself, she had covered herself, she came to the masjid of the Prophet, and narrations tell us that she let out a wail, she let out a cry which shook everyone in that masjid. Everyone began to weep. And then she began this powerful sermon. I just want to bring out one quote from that sermon, and it is a quote that is directly from the Quran. After describing what happened with Fadak, how Fadak was usurped, she quotes the Quran. She says that you have taken away from us our inheritance which was due to us, and then she quotes the Quran. She says, أَفَحُكْمُ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ يَبْغُونَ? Is it after this guidance and after this wisdom that has been conferred upon you by the greatest person to walk on this earth, Khatamul Anbiya, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Is it after all of this wisdom and all of this guidance that you revert to the days of Jahiliyyah? That you think and you act and you behave in the same way that they did during the Jahiliyyah? And how did they think and act during the days of Jahiliyyah? All of their behaviors were inherited. Their entire thought process was inherited. Their value system was inherited without evaluation and without validation. And this is exactly what psychologists refer to when they talk about the parent and child ego. That people can grow physically, but they will not grow mentally. They will not grow emotionally. They will not get to the state where they begin to evaluate all of the thought process that were sent down to them. And really this was the bigger challenge. When the Quran frames the challenge of polytheism, polytheism in itself, shirk, is a problem, but tantamount and equal to that problem was the fact that they inherited that belief without question. That in itself was as big and as vast as a challenge. And this is why, brothers and sisters, even when it comes to our own beliefs, see, this is the challenge that many people, the point might go over their heads, is that even when it comes to your own beliefs of tawheed, nubuwwah, adl, imama, ma'ad, the core beliefs of our belief, when you are asked about those, when you are in your grave by the angels, you must answer yourself. You cannot say, I answer whatever my parents give. That will not suffice. That will not work. Many verses in the Quran confirm this, that on the day of judgment, at the time of hisab, at the time of accountability, there is no more, I am from this tribe, I am from this family, I am this person's cousin, I am this person's spouse. Doesn't matter how righteous that person is. And yesterday we mentioned those verses in Surah Al-Tahrim that state exactly that. So being able to think, being able to process, being able to evaluate, being able to validate without inheriting your thought process from someone else is something which is very powerful. And being able to ask questions. See, I want to finish off with these two notes. See, in times of freedom, when you live in a state or a country or a free society, and sometimes you're confused, okay, so what is it that I do? And sometimes I get the question from a lot of people, especially from youth, questions where their understanding of fiqh, their understanding of halal and haram seems to contradict with their freedom of choice and their freedom of behavior. So there are a lot of examples out there. I won't speak of the examples. I'm sure that you can think of some of these examples yourself, but sometimes we'll have the question that people will come to us and say, well, should I do this? Is doing this halal? Is engaging in this type of behavior halal? Now here's the thing. If something is haram, then that is more than enough of a good reason to abstain from it and refrain from it. The challenge that most people have is when something is halal, but it may not be very appropriate. In those situations, I cannot give you an answer. I cannot give you an answer. And nobody can really give you an answer. What I prefer to do is that you evaluate yourself and ask yourself questions so that you can arrive at a result that you are comfortable with. Because I cannot answer for you on the Day of Judgment. However, I'll speak about 2 points very quickly. One of them is knowing how to base your decisions based off of wisdom. See, in knowledge management theory, there's something called the DIKW pyramid. Data, information, knowledge, wisdom. Data and information refer to the lower levels of understanding. Knowledge and wisdom refer to the higher levels of understanding. So in order to be able to carry out a decision when, say, a company or a business or a group, an organization, when they want to evaluate, they do an analysis, they don't just look at data and information in order to make a decision or to come to a conclusion. They think, what is the knowledgeable thing to do here? What is the wise thing to do here? See, the challenge in this day and age is that people are searching for wisdom, but they are stumbling upon data and information. This is why many people are misled when they go to Google and they do a search. Because what they are truly searching for inside is wisdom. They are trying to search for the answer of what should I do with my life? What is the purpose behind the decisions that I'm making? But unfortunately, in the age of blogs and in the age of social media, we fall more upon data and information more than we do knowledge and wisdom. There's a difference. I'll give you an example, and this is to set it very clear. See, the difference between the lower level of understanding and a higher level of understanding, the difference between information and data and knowledge and wisdom. See, when you look at the tomato is what? Is it a fruit or a vegetable? It's a fruit, right? This is information, this is basic information, basic data. Why? Because it has citric acid. This is basic information. Higher knowledge and higher understanding is not putting a tomato in a fruit salad. This is not its place. So there's a difference between having data and information and knowing how to apply that data and that information. This is what is referred to as wisdom. So when it comes to your own decisions, it's not just, is this thing halal, so I should do it. Think about it from a wisdom perspective. Is it wise to do this? And this goes back to that question of exercising freedom versus being carefree. Exercising freedom means you take into consideration the wise thing to do. Being carefree says, forget about wisdom, forget about that, I'm going to do what I want to do as long as I don't hurt anyone. Which, by the way, is a very, very problematic philosophy. Because number one, who says what hurts is? Who determines what hurts is? And number two, when you say I am not hurting anyone, or that person is not hurting anyone, yes, from an apparent standpoint, from a zahir standpoint, maybe they are not hurting anyone. But what about the batin standpoint? What about the inner aspects of our actions? Every one of our actions has an outer aspect and it has an inner aspect. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, الَّذِينَ, those who are believers, Alif Lam Mim, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابَ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. The muttaqeen are the ones who, الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ, those who believe in the unseen. So everything that we do, brothers and sisters, there is an unseen aspect to it. So maybe with the seen, with the apparent aspect, with the tangible aspect, you are not hurting anybody. But sometimes from the unseen aspect, you are causing a lot of damage. Sometimes people are looking up to you. So whether something is halal or not should not be the criteria of whether you should do it or not. You should take into consideration wisdom. There are many filters that you should run your decisions through. So this becomes the height of maturity. This becomes the height of freedom. This is what the Ahlul Bayt, this is the legacy that the Ahlul Bayt ﷺ left behind for us. So when you study the life and the wisdoms of Lady Fatima Zahra salawatullah wa salamu
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
You find that she could have given up on this world. Out of bitterness, out of lack of support, she should have said, to heck with everything that's going on. Amir al-Mu'mineen could have behaved in the same way if he was carefree. He could have said, to heck with what's going on, and unsheathed his sword and made a killing in Medina. But because they were people who exercised freedom, not people who were carefree, they were at the height of wisdom and they were at the height of maturity. And this is the legacy, brothers and sisters, that they leave behind for us. Exercising wisdom in our daily judgments, in our decision-making process. Using responsibility when it comes to freedom of expression, when it comes to freedom of choice. Knowing that if you truly are able to manifest the power of exercising freedom, you, even though you are alone, can change the face of this world. This was the lesson that she taught us. And now, brothers and sisters, I'd like to take your hearts to Medina, where the narrations tell us, and for those of you who would like to understand the final days of Lady Fatima from an in-depth perspective, I would recommend the text Bayt al-Ahzan, House of Sorrows, by Sheikh Abbas al-Qummi, who is the compiler and the narrator of a number of spectacular books. One of them is Mafatih al-Jinan, another is Manazir al-Akhirah, the stations of the hereafter, and one of them is Bayt al-Ahzan. And Bayt al-Ahzan refers to a place that Lady Fatima alayhi salam would visit after the passing of Rasulullah in order to shed her tears, in order to express her grief, in order to weep, because those that had taken away her rights because of her excessive weeping and her excessive grief, they had told her husband Amir al-Mu'mineen that tell the daughter of Rasulullah, tell her that if she wants to express her grief and sorrow, let her go outside of Medina, that it is causing a disturbance inside of Medina. So Amir al-Mu'mineen guided her to a place, and although it is known as Bayt al-Ahzan, the House of Sorrows, it was not really a house, it was a shaded area under a tree that she would seek solace under, that she would weep there. And when her weeping and her grieving became intense, when it became a nuisance for those people, they went down and they chopped down that tree so that she would have no place in order to let out her grief. During those final hours, brothers and sisters, after Lady Fatima had sustained that injury was so deep in her chest, in her ribs, that it began to weaken her physically. And the stress that was caused to her through the physical pain and the physical abuse took a toll on her, so much that she retreated to her private quarters. In one narration, Fidda, the righteous servant of Lady Fatima alayhi salam, she says that I saw Lady Fatima during those final days. On that final day, she went and she performed wudu, and she was in an enlightened state. She performed the ghusl. She herself performed the ghusl on herself. And then she took some of the hanud, some of the leftover camphor that was used on the purified body of Rasulullah. She took it with her to the room. She laid beside it. She covered herself with a shroud. She said, Fidda, go outside into the living areas. I want you in a few moments to call upon me. And if you hear me respond, then you will know I am alive. If you do not hear me respond, then you will know that my life has passed, my soul has passed to the Akhirah. At that moment, Fidda, she went outside. She waited for a few moments. And then she called on her Lady Fatima, the daughter of Rasulullah. There was no response, there was no reply. At that moment, Fidda was the first from that household to realize that Lady Fatima had passed. Moments later, Al-Hasanan, they came into the home. They asked, and Fatima alayhi salam had ordered Fidda that when Al-Hasanan come into the home, that she prepare for them the tablecloth, that she feed them, that she makes sure that they are well taken care of and they are well fed. Al-Hasanan enter the home. Fidda prepares for them food in order to eat. She says to them, eat. They turn to her, Fidda. They say, where is our mother Fatima? She says to them that Fatima is in her room. She has been asked not to be bothered. They tell her, oh Fidda, when did you see us sit at the table and eat without our mother Fatima? At that moment, Fidda does not have the heart to prevent them from entering the room of Fatima. At that moment, they enter the room of their mother. They find her lifeless body. They throw themselves on the body of their mother. Al-Hassan kissing her on her head, Al-Hussein kissing her feet, begging her to come back to life, begging her to awaken. Oh mother, we need you. At that moment, the news reaches Amir al-Mu'mineen, who is in the masjid. It says that he falls weeping, he loses his state of consciousness. When he wakes up, he is brought back to consciousness, he is taken to the body of Fatima. And it was her, brothers and sisters, it was her wasiyah, it was in her will that she be washed and shrouded and buried in the darkness of the night, so that nobody sees and nobody witnesses, especially those who had angered her during those final days. Amir al-Mu'mineen, as he is washing the body of Fatima, Amir al-Mu'mineen, the warrior of the battlefield, narrations say that as he is washing the body of Fatima, his hands are moving across her body. Finally, his hands reach the broken ribcage of Fatima. At that moment, he retreats into the corner. He begins to weep. At that moment, he begins to weep. Al-Hassanan are gathered around the body, the lifeless body of their mother Fatima, pleading with her, begging her to wake up. Amir al-Mu'mineen says that I bear witness that she responded to them. She brought out her arms and she gathered them in. She hugged them. She brought them close to give them comfort and solace. In the darkness of the night, brothers and sisters, in the darkness of the night after Amir al-Mu'mineen had washed the body of Fatima, after he had shrouded it, it is said that a number of companions, the close elite companions of Amir al-Mu'mineen, among them Abu Dhar, Ammar, among them Al-Miqdad, among them Salman, they gathered in order to take the body of Fatima to its burial site which until today is not known. And Amir al-Mu'mineen, that brave warrior, the one who could lift the gates of Khaybar with one door, does not have the strength to lift the body of Fatima alayha salam. Wa Fatimata, what a musibah, what a tragedy upon the Ahlul Bayt. He is required to have the companions assist him, and they bury her in the darkness of the night. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Wa saya'lamu alladhina zalamu ayya munqalabin yanqalibun. وَالْعَاقِبَةُ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. Brothers and sisters, there are a number of people who have a request for shifa, they have a request for our dua. Let us remember them now with our broken hearts and our tears, all of those who are in need of our dua and our supplication. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma aghfir lil-mu'minina wal-mu'minat wal-muslimina wal-muslimat al-ahya'i minhum wal-amwat. تابع بيننا وبينهم بالخيرات إنك مجيب الدعوات إنك قاضي الحاجات إنك على كل شيء قدير برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.